All right. Hello, and on behalf of the AT3 Center, welcome to today's pre-conference webinar, Assistive Technology Research, Understanding the Evidence that Supports Our Practices. Oops. Having technical trouble already. Hold on one second, there we go. There we go. Okay, today we are thrilled to have Dr. Dave Eddyburn with us. Dr. Eddyburn is the Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. His research and teaching focuses on the use of technology to enhance teaching, learning, and performance. He is the author of numerous books and articles concerning the use of assistive technology and universal design for learning. Dr. Eddyburn is a frequent presenter and workshop leader. Recently, you may have seen him at the 2020 Closing the Gap conference or the virtual 2021 ATIA conference. Like the rest of you, I am looking forward to today's webinar and learning about the latest research we can use to support evidence-based practice. Just a few reminders before we begin. To see captions, click on the CC button on the control panel. If you have questions, if you have clarifying questions, please put them in the chat window. We will stop to answer those clarifying questions. If you have questions that are going to take longer discussion, we will save those until the end, and we will try to answer as many as possible. So again, just put your questions in the chat window, and we will try to get to them as we can. We hope you will join us for our next pre-conference session, Assistive Technology Project Leadership in Statewide Accessible Educational Materials Provision, which will be on March 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern. As always, we encourage you to check AT3's website for the latest events, and we really appreciate it if you'll take time to complete the post-webinar survey. There is a link to the survey, today's presentation, in the chat window, and you will also receive a link in an email. The link here is to today's presentation. You should also be able to find a link in the chat window. And now, without further ado, I am going to turn the mic over to Dr. Dave Eddyburn.
Thank you, Kim. And we can do the share screen. Oh, here we go. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you'll be able to see my webpage at this point. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day and crazy week as this has been unfolding. I'm pleased to be here to share what I can about research and evidence-based practice. As Kim mentioned, please feel free to post questions as we go along, and we'll be glad to try and stop and answer those as we go. A couple of things to share with you today. The presentation is based in HTML, so it should be accessible to everyone. Although I think we're going to run into a problem with one of the files. But anyway, at the outset and then again at the end, I'll remind you, if you'd like to make a copy of this, you can simply go up to the top of your browser under File. And if you do Save Page As, you can save this HTML page so you have the presentation as well as all the attaching files that go along with this. So if you want to do that as we go along or at the outset here, you can have a copy to save and share and use with your staff. So I was asked to talk about research and try and make it digestible, which is something I work on a lot. So my goal is to kind of summarize some of the latest additions to the research base. And I want to start, before we go too far, I want to talk about COVID-19 and its implications for AT service delivery. And I am hoping that when we get to the discussion at the end that folks will be willing to share their experiences and thoughts. We keep talking about getting to the other side of the pandemic, and yet, and sometimes we call that returning to normal. And yet there's some acknowledgement that normal is not going to be like it was, that the world has changed and we really can't go back to how it was. So that question then becomes, what do we retain that we've done and we've learned from the COVID experience, and what are some of the fundamental changes that have to be made to address the inequities that have been exacerbated through the system. So anyway, we'll start with that topic. Then we're going to talk about how you can locate some technology research, and then how research evidence is classified. Hopefully that will help you as a consumer of research. Like to spend the bulk of our time talking about how the evidence is classified and used. And then finally, some conclusions about what is known. And often we're challenged to say, here's where the evidence base for everything we're doing. And when we go looking for it, it's not really there, or at least not in the degree we'd like it. So I'd like to share what we can be really confident about and what we really need to know a lot more about. So anyway, all the resources are embedded in the webpage, so they're there for you. To the extent possible, I've included links so that you actually grab the articles and read them. And so let me start with 4 articles here about COVID. What's kind of interesting is that these are already published. And so they're probably not the final word on what we know about what's happening. But I do want to put these in your hands, and I want to give you some highlights. So let me give you a broad overview, and then I want to dip into each one just individually. And again, if you want to grab it, click on the link, and you should have the PDF moved to your desktop. This first one comes out of Australia, which seems to have a more social justice oriented public policy. And you can kind of figure out what's going to happen here when they start the title, "Not Even Remotely Fair," and playing on that word about remote instruction. But they already have evidence that this whole remote instruction is disenfranchising students with disabilities. I find this to be a provocative read, and I've not seen this kind of language in the States quite yet, but I think it's a good porthole into what we might be seeing. Second, I want to talk about an article that comes from a think tank about what they're calling learning loss, that having kids stay at home or have reduced instruction is not only going to hurt them this year, but they're making an economic argument that the hurt could last a lifetime. And that's very provocative for somebody trying to get in the headlines, but it's also very real for those of us who are parents and teachers. And so this is actually starting to inform some public policy as we're beginning to talk about, should we require summer school this year as a way of recapturing some of the lost learning time. I want to spend a little time talking about something really interesting where a group of educators decided to hijack Amazon's Alexa to use that as an intervention for remote instruction. I find that very exciting in terms of its novelness. Clearly, it's not a solution for every household, but for those of us looking for innovative activities, that's a fun one. And then finally, I want to give us a word of warning. You may have already encountered this, but there's been tremendous pushback in May and June where administrators were just being overwhelmed by vendors who had the solution for whatever their problem was as they did remote instruction. And so just briefly talk about that as a problem and as a solution. So I'm going to click on this, and this is the one file that may not be as accessible as it needs to be. And what happens here is this downloads to our desktop, and
if you want to show that, I believe you're going to have to stop sharing this and then go to the other.
Oh, very clever.
And annoying.
Thank you for that backup too. That's good to know. All right, so here we go. There's a little slide deck. These comes from some slides that I did for ATIA, so you can see that branding and stuff. So anyway, here's the first article that we talked about. I'm going to talk about evidence levels in a few minutes. This was what we call level 6. It was data from just a single study. But here's the cover page. Just came out in this past July. Again, comes from Australia. What you might like about this is there's a number of infographics besides all the words. But here's one of the key findings that they located during the spring semester before, again, they're on a different slightly calendar year than we are, that schools were unable to provide or reduced the support that they provided for students during the pandemic. And for any of us that work in schools, we know this, but it's not really been quantified in this way. But these are some very interesting categories about, curriculum modifications being down about 20%, behavioral support being down 30%. Well, is that really a big problem if I'm not in the classroom interacting with lots of other peers. But anyway, it begins to codify some of the changes and things we're looking for. Most importantly, what we're seeing here in the United States as well is laying off personnel. So here, different types of support personnel, personal care aides. Clearly, our work in the area of assistive technology, those of you that run loan banks, I'm not sure if you've seen these kind of declines. But anyway, this is the first kind of data point that we've been able to get our hands on about what it really means. So that'll be important going forward to either verify that or come up with new numbers. Second is probably not a surprise, is that even if our IEPs are well designed, they're probably not working the way they should. Again, overwhelming negativity that we're not being held to implementing it in the way we're supposed to, or that the new challenges of remote instruction require us to amend the IEP, and we have not been too responsive to doing that. It's also very provocative to think about how we deliver AT in this environment and who's advocating for those kind of issues. And then the third finding I want to share with you is this notion of how we plan supports for students with disabilities. And again, as districts move from remote to face-to-face and back and forth, special ed is not at the forefront. And so families may feel like they're being left out and that the supports are not seamlessly transitioning as they're supposed to. Also, concerns being raised about transition between grade levels. So kids that are supposed to start middle school in the fall or high school, are they fully prepared for that, given that we're not engaging in the traditional transition activities that we normally would do? So when I summarize this report, it's relatively short, I think about 24 pages. It's the students with disabilities, it's not going well from that preliminary evidence. 80% of the respondents in Australia felt that that we shifted the responsibility for education to teachers and parents and kind of dumped on them in that sense. And so that's very challenging. And then finally, many parents reported that they're the ones having to translate learning materials and instructional materials into formats and tools that they can use. And that because we didn't see this coming, we didn't actually have systems to support parents. So again, it's often said good research supports what we know from common sense. I think at this point we've heard these stories, but again, here's a reference and a study that's somewhat systematic that I'm not aware of being done in the United States just yet. The second one is that think tank report from the McKinsey and Company Foundation, and they're arguing that the learning loss is something that could last a lifetime. Again, this is a 8 or 12 page report. Again, getting our attention by grabbing that title. Again, some interesting infographics here. As we've heard and seen through the summer about the structural inequities and health inequities, it's not unreasonable to believe that this change in format is going to have differential impact. And so here you see some data that they've collected that is suggesting that different groups will be affected differently about this in terms of the quality and the impact on their instruction. Now, what's interesting here about no instruction, whether that's parents opt out or we don't reach them, this is very significant as a category, in addition to what they call low quality remote instruction. And I would think that's pretty much state of the art, at least last spring and perhaps into this school year, as teachers weren't fully prepared to do instruction at a distance. And then these areas where things are going really well. Again, still kind of isolated case studies, but again, differentially benefiting different groups. And so they're arguing and making the case here that this is an economic issue and therefore needs the attention of the federal government and policymakers. And so this is interesting as they present 3 scenarios of what might be happening. And the first was that we went back to face-to-face by the fall. If that was the case, they would see that we've maybe lost 3 months of learning last year, but that we would increase the number of dropouts and we'd have this estimated impact of loss of gross domestic profit or product in the billions of dollars. So their initial case was that we would lose $80 to $125 billion in the economy because of the negative impact of learning loss. And what this would mean is that cumulative, this cohort of students could have lifetime learning earnings losses in the area of 44 to 57 billion. If we resumed face-to-face instruction, they make different estimates here in the middle row. And if we resume by next fall with face-to-face instruction, then they argue the learning loss gap increases to almost a year, and the dropout rate exponentially increases, and the cost to the economy just is about triple of what we saw earlier. So again, this really got out there last spring. And it builds on the case, the argument that we already know about the academic achievement gap. Its persistence is troubling, and that the COVID-19 is just going to exacerbate the problem. And that unless we start talking about this in terms of economic development, we don't really know its full cost besides the individuals, but they're also arguing that it's going to cost in social cohesion, which is another interesting dimension of this argument about the disparities between not only race, but class. Anyway, quick read, provocative, trying to challenge us to do more. Here's the article I was telling you about, Amazon Alexa. It was published in Teaching Exceptional Children. And this is an example of an article that doesn't really have a research base. This is pretty typical of research or of publications in the area of technology, is that we rush to print with the how-to. And so this article will show you how to make Alexa skills and the kinds of skills that they made and they could provide to families to download. And so what they're arguing here is that Amazon gives us a number of pre-made blueprints that are shells, and that you can go in there and kind of alter them and mess with them and do things. So if you're interested in doing that, and again, if you're in a situation where there is funding for innovation, that somebody's trying to say, hey, this is a problem, what can we do about it? We'll give you some money. That here is a framework that you could use to think about, okay, how do I learn about blueprints, and what is it that we could do using this platform to deliver some service to our clients, our students. So one example in this article they talked about was a task tracker. And basically it was making a checklist of the different steps you have to do to complete an activity. Many of us may already do this with individuals with developmental disabilities or autism, where we create a sequence list and they go through it to complete the activities. So here this uses the voice prompts to say, okay, here's what you got to do. Let me know when you're done and we'll go on to the next step. So anyway, kind of an interesting example of innovation in our space. There's not a lot of these examples, so this one excites me for a number of reasons. So take a look at that. The fourth article is, again, a perspective piece, and it's coming at the issue here that a lot of us technologists, that we just have the solution. And when I half listen to you, I can tell you what the answer is, because here's the solution, because it's what I got. And the administrative literature was very clear that by July, school administrators were fed up with this. They were getting so many phone calls from different groups that had products and services and cloud-based this and that. And the schools had no money. They were trying to figure out what to do to start with. They didn't need lots of vendors contacting them to say, hey, I've got your answers. So here's an example out here that often the marketplace is really excited about this kind of disruption, and that it's offering new possibilities for us to buy things. And so they're basically saying there's a group in society right now that is not really too upset about COVID-19. It's actually helping my business plan, because disrupting is what I've been trying to do, and now you guys kind of have to do it. So you can kind of think about this if you have an online platform of some sort, that all of a sudden now you've got a solution for a school that can't do face-to-face. So this is more of a provocative article and more on the negative. It's kind of the downside of our technology. So I wanted to share it with you just to get you thinking about the kind of critical elements of our work, that not everybody believes that technology is a solution. And so the question is that these folks are raising is, what kind of dialogue should we have about the purpose of education, the kind of society we want, and then post-COVID, is what lessons have we learned, and what is this going to look like? So let me stop sharing that and I'll go back to my screen. I wanted to give you those pages, those kind of summaries of the articles. Just as a cliff notes, you're welcome to go grab the articles here and look them over. And certainly if you have staff, if you want to do a communal read, these are sometimes interesting to get people's different reactions about what some of this is. I want to draw to your attention, I said that this is probably not the last word. At the recent ATIA, we confirmed my appointment to guest edit a special issue. So I'd like to invite each of you, the work you're doing in your state. Clearly you've learned something about, one, how to deliver services, and two, thinking about post-COVID, what services are going to stay? Are you going to be more flexible about this? Are you going to have more options? What does it mean to return to normal in terms of your services? The exciting thing about ATOB is that it's a practitioner journal. So we're looking for all kinds of voices. So as a service provider, I would be very interested in manuscripts about what it is that you do and what changed. If you have data, that'd be great. If you don't and you just have anecdotes, that's okay as well. This is also a great opportunity if you want to include parents and students. So if you want to kind of interview the people and talk about what their experience is like, so we hear that firsthand voice, that's also appropriate. So anyway, there's a link there if anybody's interested. The initial deadline is June 1st. So actually there's time if you want to do a study that you could actually conceptualize something and do it this spring. And publication will begin next fall online and then in print to follow. So anyway, let me stop. Kim, we're kind of at a transition point. Any questions from the chat that we should talk about?
No, I think we're okay to keep going.
All righty. Well, thank you. That was just kind of background. We thought that was a contemporary issue that may or may not be impacting you. Again, this will be fun to discuss at the end if you'd like to talk more about what you're doing. I should also note at the bottom of the page, there's a email form. So if you have questions or comments, you could just fill this out. It'll keep you on the page, but you can send me notes and I'll get those over email and get back to you later today or tomorrow. So if you have individual questions, that'd be fine. All right, the second topic is how do you find the research? Very often I'm given a question and somebody wants an answer really in short order, and those are sometimes difficult. So my email address is on all these materials. You could use the form. I'd be happy to try and help you answer those questions. So if you want to send me the context of what people are asking you to do and what's the evidence behind this. But I also want to share this section as capacity building. Those of you that have a budget for an office resource center, here are some journals that you probably should subscribe to if your budget would allow, because this is kind of what we call the core of the assistive technology literature, these 4 journals. If you go to the link, you'll be able to browse the current issue and find out about subscription stuff and how to submit if you're going to write something. But the Assistive Technology Journal is published by RESNA. It's published 4 times a year. It's one of the premier journals in our space. It really has an engineering and rehab focus as well. Not as much education in that space, but again, very methodologically sound and very good exploratory research when we're trying to engineer solutions. Disability Rehab and Assistive Technology is edited by Marsha Shear, and these guys publish 6 issues a year. And so this is becoming one of the leading journals in our field because they can publish far more articles. Marcia has a very international focus, and I'll share some reports later about AT internationally. And so those are finding a place in this journal. Publishes a wide array of topics and adults using AT as well. So kind of a unique focus for us. Journal of Special Education Technology is more of a pre-K through college orientation about thinking about technology, instruction, academe, published by the Council for Exceptional Children, is, I think, the oldest of these journals. Technology and Disability is an international journal, very broad-based. Again, may have less application to your work because it has more of an international focus. But again, if I was trying to build a resource center and wanted to make sure I had all the latest research, is I would subscribe to these 4 journals and make sure that somebody in the office reads and browses them when they come in so that we know what the latest developments are in our field. So that would be one way. If you don't subscribe, you can certainly look online. Certain articles are free, others we can use and we could track down through our databases. This section is a little more problematic under 2B. These are academic databases that we usually need a university research library to have access. And so anybody that's got a student ID or faculty ID, you can get into the library and search. And these 7 databases are primarily, here's a nice typo, Dave. These 7 databases are primarily where our AT literature is indexed. So if you want to be very comprehensive, you would search all 7. If you're time pressed, you'd pick 1 or 2 and see what comes up. So again, if you asked me to track things down, these are the kinds of resources I would use to help you. But I wanted to share this with you as a capacity building so that you could find that out. More practically, for many of us who are busy and don't want to really spend time in the library, is the notion of Google Scholar. And what Google Scholar does is it's a searchable database that you can put in any term. So I'm going to search for assistive technology generally. And what it'll do is it'll bring back a set of articles. You could sort them by date. You want just new ones. You want the latest ones. You want all of them. And what I want to bring your attention to is this cited by. Often we're searching on things we don't know a lot about. So I want to clue you into that number is, if this is cited by 2, it's probably an article you could skip. But when we start getting up near 1,000 or even after 500 in our field, that starts to suggest it's a very significant article. More importantly for our work today is if you click on this tab over here to the right, you'll be able to download the PDF. And so you'll be able to get that article. So the first thing I would tell you when you're searching is copy part of a citation, usually the title. It doesn't do much good often to search on the names, but if you search on the article title and paste it into, so I'm going to highlight that, copy it, come back over here to Google Scholar and paste that title in. Often what you'll find is a copy of the article and then you can download it. Now, in this case, it's taking me to a journal page, but that would be the way that you can find many of the articles you're interested in. I also want to point out another feature here is when we click on this quote mark, what will happen here is it'll generate the citation for you. So this is really great for writing reports, is you just highlight that, copy it, and paste it. And now you've got, and again, you can pick whatever format you're writing in. Usually we use APA. But those 2 features are really helpful as a way of trying to find articles. Now, in the example on the screen print I have here, I searched on my own name. And this is often helpful as a strategy if you find a researcher who's working in the area that you're really interested in. Because what this does is it shows you all his or her articles. And again, if you go to the right, you can download the PDFs. But you can start to scroll down and find articles that you maybe didn't know about that are somewhat related to your topic. And often we talk about finding a guru in some area. So somebody like Karen Erickson is that once you discover her work and what she does, to do a Google Scholar search on her name, you'll be able to find the body of work that she's created. So anyway, for those of us busy professionals, I really think Google Scholar is an important mechanism to stay up to date. Now, one more thing before we go is, I want to go back and search on that eddyburn guy. And I want to talk about this first article that came up. Would you know universal design for learning if you saw it? When you see this cited by, watch what happens if I click on that link. What it's now going to do is it's going to do another meta search within that. And now it's going to give me those 468 articles that cited that article. And this may be intuitive for some of you, but it may not be. So let me tell you why you do this. Is if these people are citing that article, they may be writing about a topic that interests me. So here all of a sudden I can find a review on universal design for learning. And so what it means is by clicking on that cited by, I can discover new research that I didn't know about. And so this is kind of what we call that tangled web of research that we cite each other and we build and we create this knowledge base. Again, if you're an expert, you know all these people and the citations and stuff. But if you're a novice and you're trying to figure this out, all of a sudden now what I've been able to do is I was able to find one article that really speaks to me. It's like, wow, that's interesting. Now by clicking on cited by, I can find a whole nother body of people that cited that for better or worse. And now when I get to this article, is like, here's an actual literature review that I can go track down that will tell me even more about universal design that came out later than the first article. And so these are some Google search strategies that allow us to find relevant research on a topic. And again, I'm going to go back to my offer that I will help you do this, and I can do this for you if you can phrase the kind of questions you have. But I also think it's important maybe to show you how to do it in case you're so inclined. So Google Scholar. Let me just stop and check with Kim. Any questions, Kim, about Google Scholar or the journals?
No questions, but positive feedback. This is great stuff. Thank you. Very helpful.
Positive feedback. That's great.
Yes.
I have no pictures on my screen. This is just me talking on radio. So good. Good. Okay, next section. One of the things we want to do is we're looking around the research is we're a lot of particularly undergraduates, we just think as long as I can find an article, we're good. And that's not really a good way to make decisions for a state or a school district. So really what we're looking for is a set of articles that tell us how much power is there between that one idea. Because almost anything I could show you, we could find another article that says, no, that's not true. Okay, and that's often what happens. And you certainly don't want that playing out at a public meeting where you're asking for something and some other group says, well, that's not right. Here's this research article and waves one article. So the important thing is that we don't want to make large scale decisions on the basis of one article. We want to see what does the whole body of research say about the topic. So here's some words you might come across as you're looking around Google Scholar or finding articles. Literature review is a specific term for going and looking up this stuff in the library. It's also a generic term. And so basically what we're looking for is somebody that went and found a whole bunch of articles and analyzed them. So as you search, I want you to be cautious about this, that a literature review is worth more than an individual article, because that person has reviewed many articles to come up with their findings. So out of all the articles I could read or find in my journals, a literature review is the most valuable, most helpful. Now, there's a new kind of literature review called a scoping review. And even those of us that went to school a few years ago, this is so new that we're probably not familiar with it. A scoping review is different. Here we're not worried so much about the quality, we're worried about finding everything we can. So the whole idea of using Alexa as assistive technology, I'm not going to find a lot of literature on that. So what I want to do is I want to go see if I can find a book chapter. I want to see if I can find a magazine article. I want to find the vendor's webpage. And what a scoping review is trying to do is gather as much information from as many sources to tell me something. And we usually have to do this when a topic is new. Now, Proloquo to go is a few years old. It's got its own literature. But when that first came out, those first 18, 24 months, and people were saying, hey, should I use this? That was a good example of why I do a scoping review, okay, is because it was so brand new. Another example right now would be is if you've got somebody trying to say, we should introduce drones in the science curriculum. Okay, I don't know anybody that's doing that yet in K-12, but that would be the reason to do a scoping review, is to search on drones, search on science, see what I can put together, and try to gather as much information. And often it's very preliminary to say, hey, this is what I did. I went and got this, and one of the children's dads came to class and helped us with that. So again, it doesn't have the same level of science, but it gets us to a beginning place to help us understand what the innovation is. Another kind of article you can find is what's called literature synthesis. And here, what that is simply trying to do is they're saying, hey, I went and found 25 articles. I'm going to try and make sense of those. So that's another good article type to find. Meta-analysis is often considered the highest level of article I can find. So if you want to do AAC and meta-analysis, you've got a really good chance of finding a small group of articles that gives you the highest level evidence about your topic. So that's a great way to search in the literature databases at the library or with Google Docs. However, in the last few years, that meta-analysis has kind of been replaced by something called an evidence review. So we've got a little bit of a taxonomy going on here, that literature review being generic, scoping being show me all the latest stuff, some sort of synthesis, some sort of meta-analysis, which is statistical, trying to show us the effect, and then evidence, which is using a new level of science to understand how good is the evidence. There are only, I'm only aware of 2 evidence reviews in our field. So this is not the state of practice yet, but people are working on this and talking about this. And so here's a term you're going to see in the future. And again, if you really want like the most comprehensive evidence on the topic, let me know and I can try and get these into your hands and help you figure out what they mean. If any of you supervise students looking for research projects or faculty, there's a huge need for this. And often this can be very fundable by different agencies that want to know the best evidence that we have. Let me use that as a kind of a transition here to what is evidence? How do we know what's good evidence? And what you see here is 4 tiers of evidence that comes from the Every Student Succeeds Act and the notion that we're supposed to be doing evidence-based interventions. We start with tier 4, which is basically kind of like the Alexa article. You got some experts saying, hey, here's a great idea. They present some how-to, but it's not clear. We have no evidence really. They don't report any outcomes of student use. So we start there, but as we build a body of literature, eventually we get some studies and hopefully at least one well-designed study, some correlational kinds of things. So it becomes promising. Once we get to tier 3, this is kind of what works clearinghouse consideration of saying, hey, you know, technology does help reading and writing. And so we do these literature reviews, we bring it together, we evaluate the evidence. And really what the What Works Clearinghouse is trying to do is to help us understand tier 3, 2, and 1. And ultimately, the kinds of things we should be doing is strong evidence. And jumping all the way to the end of today's presentation, there's not a lot that we do in the field of assistive technology that have tier 1 support. Most of our research here is at levels 3 and 2. Overwhelmingly, the most of what we've got is at level 4. You know, we've got some stuff that we've made, but we really don't know if it works. And so the strongest evidence really we've got is in the area of AAC. The moderate to strong is in the area of video prompting and video modeling for people with intellectual disabilities, autism. And then pretty much everything else is going to be down here. There's just not enough research, not enough good research. So one of the ways, so I bring this up because as federally funded projects, you'll have to address this, but it's very difficult without having a statistical background. There's another model that it's used more at the article level of coding. And what we have here is 7 steps. And at 7 steps, it's the opinion of authorities and experts. So again, like the Alexa article is like they say, hey, we should look at this. From there, we go to level 6, which is data from a single study. It's like, hey, we did this one study. If we do a systematic review, now I got 10 or 20 studies. That's more evidence than these other ones. Once we get to well-designed experiments and controlled trials, randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses with effect sizes, this is what as we read an article, we're looking to code it at one of these levels. And if we get sources like Closing the Gap, that would be 7. If we get opinion stuff and Teaching Exceptional Children, that's 7. If I go to a journal like Journal of Learning Disabilities and I get 1 study, that would be 6. If I went to Assistive Technology Journal and found a review of the literature on a topic, that might be 5. once we have really well-designed studies, it could be up in this area. So anyway, in my work, I've started trying to code articles on these 7 to give us a sense of where we're at in the literature. Let me stop as we transition to a new topic. Kim, any questions, comments?
We have a comment from Alaska.
Woohoo.
And it's like Northern Alaska K through 12 schools have drone classes for high schoolers. They're using them so the students can track whaling expeditions for safety. And so they know when they are coming in so they can prep the beach. And then the question is, Dave, maybe you'd like to go there and do a research project.
Yes. Yes. Usually my invitations to go to places like Alberta come for February. So yes, going to Alaska would be the next logical step. But thanks for sharing that. That is really a great story. Now, if we go back to this taxonomy, it's whoever decided to do that didn't do it because of level 1 research or level 1 evidence. They did it because it was innovative. And they were trying to turn kids on to this problem solving and teaching them science. And the authorities, the experts, the curriculum specialists thought, hey, this is a great way to marry these different topics and do that. Again, if they write about that and get it published, it would be a single study. And then we would need, 10 or 20 more of those to say, hey, this is really how we should turn kids on to science. So yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to section 4 here. This is probably not as helpful as the title sounded when I made it up. And this comes from a report I'll share at the end. The question comes up a lot, particularly for parents and some policymakers, is, okay, where does the AT fit? And so what I did here is I created a table to say we've got different domains of AT. We could talk about access. We could talk about applications that help me on behavioral and social skills, help me communicate, help me become more independent, help me in the learning context in schooling, and then help me with mobility. And so what I did, I tried to populate this table with a set of disabilities and put a dot in the box of, okay, this is kind of important for this particular disability. And you could see something like intellectual disability, it's pretty much all of those. Maybe not for every student, but for some students, it's like very complex. And the same with speech language kind of stuff. We can kind of argue about this. As experts, I think you have insight into all of these, and this is more or less interesting. But I think sometimes to help people find the right research, we've got to break it down into how they think, and then in those domains. And so that's what that was for. So I don't know how useful that'll be for you guys. So then the second thing I did is took another table and did the same thing, but to say, here are the common types of AT that might be relevant as you look at these. And again, I don't think anything's interesting here because particularly those of us that have loan banks, we've populated with these kinds of things. Those of us who are AT specialists, these are the tools we have. I don't think this tells you anything. I probably more suspect of what I omitted in terms of, is there a big category of something in one of these categories? So let me stop here and ask, is there anything here you'd like to know more about in terms of the research on any specific kind of AT? Either requests that you get or things you're wondering about being challenged to say, where's the evidence base for X?
And I'll wait to see if someone puts something in the chat, but I would say that if someone wanted to unmute themselves, that might be okay too.
I believe they would maybe have to raise their hand, and I might have to unmute them.
Okay.
I'm not seeing anything right yet, Dave.
Okay. Let me just share one that I get a lot, and that's in the area of text to speech. And so I've been working with the state of Wisconsin that is planning on releasing a report in March about the need for text to speech. And it cites some of the research, but also tells some of the practice of like, what does a teacher have to do? How do we navigate these systems? So anyway, if anybody's interested in that, I know the number of requests I get that's probably the leading one right now is what's the evidence for text to speech, and if I give it to a student, will they not learn to read? Or if I give them speech to text, will they not learn to write and stuff like that? So anyway, that's a forthcoming report if that helps. But I guess I shared this list in the sense that once we get down to this level of specificity, the research is not as clear. There's typically not enough. Now, I would say something like picture supported text is well known, and I could probably get 30 to 50 articles about that. Visual schedules, I bet it's less than 25. It's something we do, but not as been studied as much. Social skills training and video modeling, those are well researched areas, so we're very good. AAC is well researched. Braille, not as much. It's an example of something that's functional. So like, why would we, do research on something that seems to make sense? Tactile graphics is very mixed. It's very limited. Lots of research on wayfinding with mobile devices and stuff. Again, I don't know that if you're going to give a student a mobile device for their wayfinding and independent navigation, that you need research to say, hey, that works. So that goes back to those 7 levels of research, is that often it seems to make sense. There's a level of independence. We're not going to do a whole study. We're going to go with it. So I guess I want to conclude here by saying, if you have any of these questions about it, this level of what's the evidence for blank, feel free to follow up and contact me, and I'll be happy to see what I can find.
I have one in the comment box that was evidence regarding the use of assistive technology and the ability to stay in the community versus nursing homes.
Yes. There is some literature on that. I don't have as much of that at my fingertips because I usually stop at post-secondary, but I think that independent living and community supports is a good literature, and I could probably find more. There's a whole funding stream through NIDLR that accepts grants in those areas about AT and supporting community independence. So I think there's a pretty relevant literature and a funding source, which is a pretty good connection. Okay. We're doing really good on time here. We're heading into the home stretch. The final area I want to talk about is what's effective. And I want to give you, before we leave, I want to give you this report that I did last year. And so I had to draw some conclusions because the funder asked me to, tell them what we know. So here I've got a couple of bold bullets, and then I give you the best resource that I can. So here's my conclusion. At this time, only a small number of AT interventions can be documented as having a moderate or strong evidence base. This finding in the context of the rapid review of the literature is congruent with previous AT evidence synthesis reviews. So here, this one is dated 2012, but I would argue everything they found is still true, that we're not an evidence-based profession, that not everything we do is evidence-based. We're very vulnerable when policymakers really want to talk about where the evidence is. And if they want that kind of what works clearinghouse level of evidence, we can't really show it. So in my work, I really try to help people craft the message to the policymaker, the decision maker, to say, here's why we think it works. Here's the available evidence we have. And often we're in cases that nothing else has worked. So it's not like we need a what works clearinghouse standard of research. It's just we need some evidence to say that we're not wasting our time doing this. Okay, probably not the outcome you wanted from today's workshop, but that's the first one. Second, the most research validated AT intervention focuses on speech, language, and communication disabilities and the use of AAC. The research evidence is strong and exceedingly clear. Providing individuals with a method of communicating, the earlier the better, improves a variety of outcomes relative to independence, education, and quality of life. This literature dispels the myth that we should wait, because if I give a young child an all-com device, they won't develop their speech. Okay, it's been disproven over and over again. It's interesting, I teach a college course and that question comes up from the in-service teachers. So the myths are alive and well. My sense here, why this one space is so well developed is that SLPs are a little more clinical. than the rest of our profession. And so they've been able to build a very solid research based on individual cases and small group cases. And so here are 3 of the best evidence reviews. And so I feel 100% comfortable with this statement in bold and these citations that we should be doing this, and that we've got a lot of underserved kids that we haven't reached yet that could benefit from this technology. So from this literature, the evidence is overwhelmingly clear. There is no downside. There is no unreasonable outcome, negative outcome of providing these devices. The earlier, the better. Okay, so again, this probably supports many of the people on this call that are doing this kind of work. We know this, but here's the rock solid evidence that at the highest statistical research level, we can't dispute these findings. This is just overwhelmingly clear. On the research side, a whole bunch of researchers are saying, hey, we're not going to get better unless we have new tools and protocols for evaluating the grading, the primary research studies. This really is a problem we need to do in training researchers. A variety of resources here to say, we've got to get our act together if we're going to, if the policymakers and the funders are going to hold us to an evidence-based standard. What we've got right now is not so good. And so we've got plenty of work to do. So anyway, if you're working in this space and want ideas, these 3 articles will give you a good idea of the agendas that we should be working on. And then finally, the overall outcome of our evidence concerning AT is generally low because most of our studies have methodological limitations. They don't have the right design, or they're not powered well. A small number of subjects. They don't adequately describe the participants' functional limitations or the study contexts. We don't do a good job of reporting effect size and confidence intervals. These are really issues for researchers and journal editors and the reviewers, because just because an article is published doesn't mean it's good research. And so what we're seeing here is that we've really got to make a concerted effort, and we've not really done that. We've not been funded in our field. So this is really a challenge to all of us. I want to draw your attention to this first article. There's been quite a bit of work here in the last 2 years about creating a what's called GREAT. It's an international organization focused on expanding assistive technology use throughout the world. When you download this article, you really get all of volume 1, which is about 570 pages. But anyway, I think you'll hear more about GREAT in the future, because this is trying to coordinate our individual country-specific efforts to a more global agenda and resources. And so very, very excited to watch this group grow, and post-pandemic, when they start holding conferences again, that could be very exciting. And then finally, little literature here about including the public, and particularly our users, in assistive technology design and research. This work is getting a lot of movement from Australia, who has a different orientation towards social justice and government and disability rights. So another piece of our puzzle here is that we're not on the same page. And because of these primary limitations, I can't answer all of your questions, which fortunately you didn't pepper me with too many, to the level of satisfaction like we saw with OGCOM. Okay, let me take you into the home stretch here. 2 things. Again, if you have any questions, personal or follow-up questions or comments, feel free to write me here. A lot of what I presented today was based on a literature review that I did for the United Kingdom. They asked if I would do a rapid review of the literature, which is kind of it's a literature review. And so what here is the project final report page, and you can download it in PDF or view it online. But more importantly, I asked if I could create stakeholder reports. And so I've got 5 groups here: developers, policymakers, educators, researchers, and administrators. And I wrote a separate report for each of them. So some of the findings are the same from the general report that you can download here, but some are very specific about what it is developers need to know. And that's about engaging with users and doing focus groups. what policymakers need to know about how they do change and how they affect teacher preparation that would make teachers more receptive to using AT in the classroom. For classroom educators is how do I make this stuff work and how do I manage it? Again, so anyway, these 6 reports are available to you if you'd like to download those in PDF. I will warn you that some of the language and spelling is specific to the UK, but I think the general recommendations are very useful. And again,
So Dave,
yes,
oh, sorry, go ahead, keep going.
nope, I got one more thing, but go ahead.
I was gonna say we do have a question, 2 questions and a comment. So whenever you're ready, let me know.
Go ahead.
Okay, so first question. So if a teacher in one of our schools would like to try some AT, but there isn't much evidence, tier 3, 4, and their admin says no due to no evidence base, is there some verbiage that could help support that teacher?
That is a great question. I wish I built that into the web page. Yes, if that person would write to me, let me send them a package of stuff, because what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about R&D, research and development. And really what we're going to do is we'll design an individual study to get the evidence. And with AT, we do 2 things. Is we keep measuring your performance without AT. And most of the time that's 0 because I can't do whatever you're asking me to do. It's just flat. I keep asking me to read and I can't read it. And then I give you the AT and we measure you're doing the same task. And typically we plot those 2 on top of each other. And what we're trying to do is see the difference between those. And we call that the boost. And we graph that. And that's the evidence we take back. And so we're not asking, will this help every kid in the state? We're asking, will it help this individual student? And often that little model of just 2 weeks of data collection is often enough to say, here's the evidence. We know in special education, this is called single subject research. This is kind of a specialized form of that for answering AT questions, because we're trying to figure out if I do A, B, and C, what would be the boost? What's the benefit? And so it's a way of how do we present this? So yeah, I'd be very happy to share some stuff. Gosh, I wish I thought about putting that on here for everybody.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Let's see, next question. We have a grant to provide a consult, devices, and training to approximately 1,000 individuals through our Department of HSS. The HCBS contractor wants us to tie our quality of life survey to the cost of the assistive technology. I'm concerned that will skew the data and could result in a negative impact. Any thoughts?
Boy, somebody's being very clever to pose that. Yeah, the problem with that one is they're treating AT like a washing machine or a new car. And the fact that you can't have a more expensive car because a cheaper one will work. So yeah, that's a tough one. Typically that has come up in the area of why should I buy a product versus why shouldn't I use open source? So I think, yeah, that's another one we might want to talk more offline about, because I think one of the things we'll have to do is we'll have to craft it to have multiple measures. Besides just quality of life, if we can get some satisfaction or other data that would say, I feel better about myself, some things that are not quite as quantifiable, and to show a package, because otherwise it's just a decision based on price. And that's discriminatory. That is not in the federal law, that price is allowed to be a factor or the deciding factor. So in some respects, they've kind of crossed a line. It's not unreasonable because it is a type of analysis and it is a form of data, but whether it can be the ultimate decision point, we probably want to contextualize it more than just give a simple yes or no question or a dollar and cents answer. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a bit vague, but that is such a powerful question that we're not really well prepared. So I would love to think more about that one.
Yeah, thank you. Comment here was, I have an interest in research literature in AAC scale up in K through 12. I am working on this at a state level, and this comes from Idaho. So that was more of a comment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, let me know if there's any resources. You've got a couple here in that last section that do the OGCOM stuff. So I would think these three would be, no, not these three. I think these three would be very, very useful if you hadn't discovered those. Yep.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, heading into the home stretch here, go away, there we go. The last thing I wanted to show you on this, on the report from the UK, the reason I wanted to send you here is that I was also able to give you the data set. This review resulted in over 960 articles. So if you click on this, what you'll get is a searchable database, and you can, I generally push it up to 100 on my screen. But what you can now do is you can search by the evidence level. You can search by an author's name. You could search on a date. You could search on a journal name. So let me just search for Closing the Gap. And then once you get your list, you can go over here and print it to PDF, and it'll give you your bibliography. And so this is a way that you could do your own research of the literature. So here I just searched on, show me all the articles that have a moderate or strong. So strong came up by itself, but others where it was more in between, you get both. So what you've got here, out of 968 articles, we've got 17 that provide strong level 1 evidence of our work. And then you have to go track these articles down and find them, but at least you've got this. So, so what's exciting is that what you're doing is you're searching on keywords in the title. So again, any keyword, journal, person's name, date, as well as the evidence level, then you could kind of do your own search. And I'm going to end where we started with here about offering to help. I've got all these tools on my desktop. So again, as I understand your research questions, I'd be happy to try and make a little bibliography or summarize what I know about these articles and give it back. But what I thought was powerful here, for those of you that have to answer these evidence questions, is that here's a database of 968 articles over the last 15 years about. Now, again, it's a scoping review, so it doesn't have every single last article. But again, if you find an article that's interesting and you copy the title back into Google Scholar, you could, theoretically get that article and track that down. So with that, it is, it's 3:03. I went over. With that, let me conclude the formal part of my presentation, and then we've got 25 minutes or so for Q&A. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dave. So just to be clear, I see in the chat that several folks were interested in information, and that you responded to other folks. If they want any information, they should fill out that form on your website. Is that correct? That's the best way?
That's easy, because you can do it right now while we're talking about it, or you can come back and visit it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think my email address is out in the materials too, if that's,
Yes.
but I thought the built-in form was easy.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I know we did block off time in case there were questions, so I'm going to suggest that if folks have questions, now would be the time to ask, or if you want, raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Yeah, this would also be the time for discussion if people are wanting input from other participants. That would be great.
Okay. We'll give folks a few more seconds. If not, then I know sometimes with all this information, folks need a chance to just step back, think about it, process it, and about 45 minutes from now, they'll be, darn, I wish I had asked that question.
It's all
But they
good.
know how to reach you.
It's all good. They do.
Okay. Let's see. Yep, that's what I'm hearing. I need to digest the information. So I know, I do too. Okay, well then, since it is
Let
about,
me give one last pitch as a conclusion. Particularly those of you involved in grant writing, keep us in mind as you work on your proposal. I can't turn around things real quickly, but if you give me a few days or a week, we could certainly set up a time to talk and figure out how you get the latest research. But I'm really hoping that last website with the searchable articles will really help you. But again, if you have specialized needs beyond that, feel free to reach out.
oh, that's great. I have a feeling folks are going to take you up on that offer.
That'd be great. It's going to help all of us. So
For sure.
I appreciate the chance to have the conversation about research when it's not 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, me too. Well, I want to thank you, since I'm not seeing any more questions. I want to thank you for your time, Dr. Eddyburn. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing the literature and those research resources. I know our folks are going to use that. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who attended. Be sure to complete the survey, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.